What happens when two successful entrepreneurs get together for a drink? They talk shop, of course. So grab your favorite cocktail and sit alongside Scott DeLong and Vince Moiso, two seasoned business leaders that have driven their own companies to success, as they share from their experience and dive deep into the secret sauce that can turn a company around. The CEO Podcast starts now.
Hi, I'm Scott DeLong. This is Vince Moiso here at the CEO Podcast. This is actually part 2 of our series on conflict. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about last time of understanding conflict, reframing conflict. And this time I want to go into some conflict resolution processes. So things that will help get through the conflict so that they become a positive instead of a negative.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I love it.
So we're back to drinking the Japanese beer again. We just had some sushi. Life is good. All right.
It is good.
All right. I'm not really a fish guy, but this was pretty good.
I'm sorry.
I can do this.
Sushi's decent, man. Yeah. And then Japanese beer, Asahi. We had Sapporo before. I think you can't go wrong with either one of those.
Well, I wanted to do a light one today because it's 88 degrees here in San Clemente. We don't normally get that. So it was warm today. So a lighter beer made more sense than one of the heavy IPAs we've been doing.
The sushi and the beer went down easy.
Okay, good. All right. So conflict resolution process. I mentioned last time that your EO group actually had me come in and talk a little bit about that. It was only a 45-minute talk or something, but and it dealt with the process on how to resolve conflict. But let's go back a little bit to reframing it first. And I think that's a good starting point. Reframing conflict is just a difference of opinion. Now, if we can start there, we don't have to be in this fight or flight or freeze mode. We can just say, okay, great. You think this, I think this. How do we get to the next step? We actually have a course that we combine conflict and negotiation together.
I was just going to ask you that. So how much of conflict resolution is negotiation?
Most of it. Right. So if we're dealing with negotiation and you have this thing that you want to sell for this price and I kind of want to buy it, but I've got this price in my mind, we're going to negotiate. Well, there's a difference of opinion on the value of that thing, right? So sure, all negotiation ends up being a conflict. So this conflict resolution process that we're going to talk about really helps in a negotiation process as well. Make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
Well, we talked about, and I mentioned in the previous podcast around understanding conflict, I mentioned these 3 natural ways of dealing with conflict. The one is fight, another is freeze, the other is flee, and none of which help to resolve conflict. So how do we avoid falling into that trap? Because I think we come in contact with conflict, we have this natural reaction. All of us will react in one of those 3 ways very naturally. I think the awareness of the fact that that's going to happen will help in the way that we resolve conflict. And so Scott, how do we avoid falling into any one of those traps?
So I think the first thing is to recognize any power differences that there might be. So if you're the boss and you've got a subordinate there, there's obviously a power difference there, right?
Yeah.
And generally, it's going to be the boss is going to be the fighter and the subordinate is going to be the fleer.
Well, and who's recognizing what in that scenario? So you've got leader and subordinate, right? And so who's recognizing what?
Well, I'm hoping everybody does.
Yeah.
But I'm suggesting that, and this is the CEO podcast. We're talking to CEOs. We're talking to leaders. We're talking about leadership. It's incumbent upon us, if we want to be better leaders, we need to recognize it.
Yeah.
Even if they don't, we need to recognize it.
I do agree that. I agree with that completely. I mean, point the finger inward before you ever point it outward.
Sure.
And certainly it is incumbent on us as leaders to take responsibility of recognition in a conflict in the scenario that you pointed out. So if that's with an employee, understand that we're going to be intimidating in that situation, whether we like it or not, just based off of the organizational structure.
Sure.
And so we have to recognize that, and we are sitting in a position that's higher than the other. And so immediately in that scenario of conflict, okay, great. We have to recognize that we're going to have to tone it down a little bit. We're going to have to come up. We're going to set the tone, right? So what are some ways that people can do that?
Well, again, going back to those three questions: what do I want? What do I want for you? What do I want for the relationship?
Yeah.
And do I want this dominant relationship that you're always going to do what I tell you to do and get compliance from you, or do I want a relationship that if you're my subordinate, that I get a commitment from you? Sure. I go for commitment, not compliance. So the first, and you say, whose responsibility is it? I always believe it's 100% my responsibility. I just do. Now, I hope the other person thinks the same thing. I hope they believe it's 100% their responsibility. But even if they don't, it's my responsibility to do the best I can in dealing with this other human being that I want to have a longer-term relationship with anyway, whether it's subordinate, whether it's spouse, whether it's child, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If I want to have a better relationship, it's 100% incumbent upon me to make it better.
So
no, that's not saying it's 50-50.
I think I think to the fact when I think of conflict resolution, I think of how important language is in that conversation as you're working to resolve things. And I think back to a very specific example that happened a few years back in a business setting, not so dissimilar to what you described, where I had somebody that was reporting to me in that scenario, and I just there was a lot of conflict. I mean, just from performance to deliverables to accountability and things like that just weren't happening in the time it needed to happen, all sorts of stuff like that. And I remember, ultimately having, reaching that conversation where we've got to get to some sort of resolve so that we're on the same page. And this person responded, well, how about we call a truce? And I thought, well, a truce would mean we're at war and we're not on the same team.
Yeah.
Yet we are on the same team. So no, I don't want to call a truce with you because I think we're so far apart by the fact that you're just saying, let's call a truce,
Yeah.
And that's where I think language is so important, because I think by that person saying those words actually took us further apart from resolution.
Absolutely. Right. You're not going to resolve it by ignoring it. And the truce is ignoring the thing that's sitting in front of you.
Right.
So we go through a process, and there's some things that you can do step by step in order to work through the conflict yourself. But the first portion is recognizing what it is that you want out of the deal.
Yeah.
So start there. If I can do that, and I know that I want a good relationship, all of a sudden my shoulders soften a little bit. Mm-hmm. The brow is no longer furrowing, and I'm just saying, no, that's not what I want, is to win this battle. What I want is to make something better.
Yeah.
And in fact, we can probably get to a better resolution between your idea and my idea than we can with just my idea. I believe that. Didn't always believe that, but I believe it, right? We are smarter than me. So if I walk into a scenario with that, I got a good start.
Yeah.
So the next thing that I like to do, there's a saying that I like to use a lot, and it's writing clarifies thought. You ever get in that motion or that place where all these thoughts are swirling around in your head and you can't figure things out, and this is tied to that and this related over there, and all it looks like a spider web.
Yeah.
Right. So in that scenario, the first thing that I want to do is start writing things down. Now, I recommend journaling all the time, but I'm talking about a conflict resolution right now too. And we actually have a kind of a 2-page document that we hand to people as a tool that gets you to say these things. What is it that I want? Why do I want that? Right? The solution that I'm looking for. Why do I want that solution? What's important to me? I get a good handle on that. It's not just to win. Hardly ever is it just to win. So I've got that. The other thing that I need to do is try to understand from before I even talk to you about it, understand from your point, what is it that Vince wants? Why do I think Vince wants that thing? And what might be a resolution that Vince would be willing to accept?
I want to win, Scott. So that's the resolution here for me.
Good. So now what I do is
as long as I win, we're good.
So now here's what I would do is look for ways to make you think you won. Really simple.
Yeah.
My wife does it all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Like my idea. So, and that's part of this conflict resolution process that we're talking about, is if I can make this thing your idea, or get you to come around and understand where I'm coming from, or understand better from where you're coming from. And that conflict resolution document starts that process. But that's not all of it, because I can't get in your head. I don't know what you're thinking. I just think I know what you're thinking, right? So the first portion that I want to do, and this goes back to the communication process, is understand from your point of view. And the best way for me to understand what you're thinking is to ask you some questions. So what is it that you're looking for? How's that important to you?
Yeah.
How would that move the ball forward for you?
Yeah.
What is it that you want? Tell me why you want that. And if I can draw that out of you, I've got a chance. I've got a chance to see things from a different point of view. If you look at some of the books on negotiation, they'll tell that win-win solution, right? And that is, come to find out, we might want, from the same thing, we might want completely different angles, and we can both get what we want without even having to compromise at all.
Absolutely. Well, in the concept that I think of when you talk about asking questions, right? So you're seeking first to understand.
Yep.
One of the ways that you can seek to understand is to ask questions and then just listen. So we talk about this, in a previous podcast on communication. We had the two-parter, right? So we talk so much about just listening. And the reality is conflict comes oftentimes from somewhere else. In other words, the conflict that's created in a business scenario is that person, which might be your customer, might be an employee, whatever. They had a bad day. They got something going on at home. They got something that's going on elsewhere that's creating this conflict that's happening.
Or they just see the world differently.
Whatever the reason is irrelevant. My point is this: sometimes people just want to be listened to. And you've got to recognize that. I think you can get to resolve really quickly when you can recognize that somebody just needs to be heard. So it can be a very good practice, and I've practiced this. Just shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Right? Is ask the questions and then shut up and listen. Because sometimes the person just wants to get something off of their chest. And I will almost all the time, I'll look at that person and I'll say, this is what I heard. I'm hearing you say this. And I repeat what I'm hearing. So I never give a suggestion. I never provide a solution. I'm not listening to solve the problem.
Or a rebuttal.
Or any of that. I'm just listening. And I repeat what I heard so they understand I'm listening. And I've had it happen many times where the person on the other end simply just said, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was enough. Yeah. And so I think we have to recognize those situations that you can quickly resolve conflict by listening.
So you used the words that sometimes people just want to be heard. I'm going to amend that to say almost always people just want to be heard. So there's a good starting point. And if I can do that, I can get to a spot where they soften, and then they're willing to ask, what is it that I want?
Yeah.
Not always. I mean, you've got some of the fighters out there that are going to push. This process works almost with everybody. Here's where it doesn't work. Sociopaths and narcissists. Tough to negotiate with those folks because they don't give a shit. They don't care about you at all. They care about their thing, and they're going to push, and they're going to win, and they're going to whatever. So when I'm talking about a conflict resolution process, I'm not talking about dealing with a narcissist. But any reasonable, rational human being is going to allow me my turn to be heard if I give them their turn to be heard first.
No doubt.
So
well said.
Well, even in the little document that I hand to people and say, what is it that I want? Why do I want that? That comes first because I need to spew out my stuff first.
Yeah.
But when in practice, though, I want to find out what you want first, because you're going to be a lot easier to deal with if I've heard you, if I've listened to you, if I'm not rebutting your thing. Yeah, but, right? To take the yeah buts out of this, that's no way to resolve a conflict. You tell me you want some, yeah, but, right, this and that or whatever the thing, I can trump you. What happens when we do that is we escalate the conflict. I say this, you get defensive and say this, then I get defensive and say this, and we keep going on and on and on and on. And that's what I call unresolved conflict.
Well,
that's to read to hostility.
I talked earlier about language and the importance of language, and let's just address the yeah but. But is a word that you need to remove from the conversation because it's negative.
Yes.
And basically the connotation of it is, as soon as you say the word but, you've just eliminated everything that was just said. I said all of this, but right. I just removed all of that because what I'm going to say next trumps it.
Yep.
And so you've got to remove but from the conversation. And so I try switching it to and.
Yes.
And. Yes, and.
Right.
I was thinking that maybe we could talk about this. Yes, and. Yeah. If you start using the word and is positive, and, it requires you to continue the conversation and doesn't negate what was said before.
And they actually hear that you said the word yes.
Yes.
I heard you. I don't always agree with you when we have a difference of opinion. No question. So yes doesn't mean, oh, great point, I lose. It doesn't mean that at all.
No, you're not admitting anything.
That's not what that means.
Yeah.
And if we considered this, have we considered that, right? The and instead of but. Absolutely. Yes.
Well, I go back to you said, I think one of the very, very key things. So let's talk about negotiation in conflict resolution, where if it is a scenario that's beyond somebody just wanting to be heard, right? So where we're just listening to resolve,
right?
And it really is a negotiation. So you've got to get to some scenario where we resolve the conflict. It needs to be win-win. When you ask the person what they want, then you are creating a scenario where you're going to understand where you can get to a win-win situation.
And if I don't ask that question of what you want, how do I know it's going to be a win for you? I have no idea.
You don't.
I have no idea.
You have no clue because you don't know. You don't know what's going to make you happy at the end. I'm only worried about what's going to make me happy. So when you can create the win-win, great. What did I say to you, Scott, earlier? I said, I want to win. As long as I win, we're good.
Yeah.
So great. Win-win means we both win.
I can make that happen.
That scenario is perfect.
There's a solution in here that we can make it so that you win too. And winning is getting what it is that you want or need or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And I can get what I want and need at the same time. In fact, we're probably, through this process of conflict resolution, we're probably going to have a better solution, an overall better solution. You wouldn't have thought of because you just wanted what it is that you wanted. I wouldn't have thought of it because I just want what I want.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So we're going to have a solution that's going to produce more than what even considered.
Yeah, no doubt.
So how do you do conflict resolution? Well, the first thing is recognize that people have a difference of opinion.
Yep.
And that's okay. And more than okay, it's probably good. If I can learn something from you because you think differently than me, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Boom, back of my head, got that. Second thing is that I want to make sure that we both get the things that we really need. And we don't always need the first thing that's out of our mouth, right? The first thing that I say, I want this. Yeah. That might not be where the need is. And that's why we ask the questions and try to find out to get to the why.
Yeah.
So how to get to why without asking why? Because if I ask you, well, why? It would sound accusatory. It would sound like you're stupid, or it would sound like all of that. So the next thing that I want to do is ask further questions, qualifying questions.
Well, change the why to what. What is it, Scott, is that might, make you happy in this situation? So I haven't, why are you acting like this, Scott?
So
why do you want that, Scott?
What I like even better than that is that if I can get you to tell me a story, then I don't have to answer a direct question like what is that or why is that, and what's certainly better than why, absolutely. But if I can get you to tell me a story, oh, that's interesting. Hadn't thought of that. Tell me more.
Tell me more.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Right? If you start telling me more, you're going to give me all kinds of clues on what's important to you.
Yeah.
And guess what? I might be able to get exactly what I want by taking care of whatever it is that you need, and neither of us.
Repeat what you heard so that you're showing that you have a clear understanding of what they said.
Right.
Tell me more. Oh, okay. What I heard is
help me understand.
Yeah.
Things along those nature, because I want you to tell me a story, not just a fact-based kind of a yes or no kind of an answer, but a story behind that, because the story tells me why. What's important and why is that important? Mm-hmm. It's going to be embedded in your story if I'm listening. So the conflict resolution process really isn't that much different than making friends. Like figuring out how to get along with people, how to play in a sandbox together. Yeah. When you get down to it, how do we play in the sand? Everything, I tell this all the time, you're not going to learn anything new from me. Everything you need to know, you learned by the time you were in kindergarten. which is how to play in a sandbox. And a conflict is, you have the conflicts in kindergarten? Sure we did.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's my toy and that's my toy. Yeah. And what do we both want? We just want to have fun.
And somehow you got to work through it.
Yeah, work through that.
Yeah.
And if I can solve your needs, almost always you're going to give me an opportunity to get my needs solved as well.
Yeah.
Almost always.
Yeah.
But barring the narcissists and sociopaths, and there's some of those guys out there.
And you've got to get rid of this fear of conflict. I think you said the words conflict can be good, right?
Yeah.
And conflict can be resolved. What I find is so many have fear of conflict. Salespeople have the most fear of conflict. They want so much to look good in the eyes of their customer. They flee from conflict and fear it, right? Yeah. And then it creates fear-based selling. And I think you got to, whatever you can do to get rid of that fear of conflict and understand that conflict is going to happen. It will happen. It's normal. It's okay.
Because people think differently than I do.
Well, and
they have different wants and needs than I do.
And there's ways to resolve it. These are the nuggets that we're giving. Okay, so let's do our rundown. We're there, right? So I think we've hit the point, right? Head on.
Yeah.
Okay. Top 3. What can you give to our listeners? Top 3 things for them to get to conflict resolution.
Recognition. The first is the recognition that conflict can be a good thing. It doesn't inherently have to be bad. Mm-hmm. And that it is 100% incumbent upon me to turn this situation around.
Yeah.
That's number 1. The second thing is to take the time to write it out, to figure it out, to get these swirling thoughts out of your mind, and to get down to the real issue, the real thing that's important to me. And I can do that by writing it down. And then also I take the same document and try to figure out what your needs are too. And then the third thing is forget what it is that I need up front and start being concerned about your needs and trying to understand what those needs are. There's a lot of clues in your needs. You're going to tell me a lot of things on how I can get what I want by listening to you.
Yeah.
Those would be my top 3.
My top 3, simple. Language, just listen, win-win. So language is really important in conflict resolution, and things like saying things like help me understand. Yeah. How can I help, right? Just using simple things like language, like don't use the word but, use and instead of that. Good. Things like that can really create a scenario that will get you to quicker resolve by using the right language and avoiding the wrong language, like the example I gave earlier about, hey, let's call it truce, right? Yeah. No, don't do that.
Good intentions behind that, bad execution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Language is important. The second thing is just listen. I'll change, rather than oftentimes. You said always.
Almost always.
Almost always. Yeah. People just want to be heard, and I think if you just take the time to listen, help me understand and ask questions. Right, and then just listen. Shut up and listen. And oftentimes you'll get to resolve by just listening.
It'll make me smarter. It'll soften them up, and it'll give me opportunity to see how I can flank that.
Absolutely.
There's all kinds of stuff in there.
Well, my third thing is win-win, right? I think you've got to create. That's a Stephen Covey, habit, is just create the win-win solution. And I think if you get to win-win, it's always the best resolution you could come to out of conflict.
Yeah. Well, and the win-win does what? It makes the relationship stronger.
Absolutely.
It makes you want to do this again.
Yeah.
Instead of avoid me, right? And I go back to the initial 3 questions we talked about in the previous podcast. What do I want? What do I want for them? What do I want for the relationship? I want that win-win because it builds that relationship. It tells you that I'm someone you can deal with. Let's do that.
Love it.
Right?
All right.
Really simple.
Thanks for listening. As always, we want your feedback, so let us know. We definitely want to hear from our listeners, and we've heard from so many of you already, and we've created content just based off of what you've asked for. So please let us know if there are certain topics you'd love for us to discuss. You can get in touch with us. Check out the CEOpodcast.net and leave us a message there, and we'll certainly
I've got something even better than that.
What's that?
So it is, if you've got a conflict that you can't resolve, a very specific conflict that you've been struggling with, and you need some help resolving it, give us a call. We'll help you walk through it.
Yeah.
Show
Love
you a
that.
process.
I'm in.
Show you a process.
I'm in. Count me in.
All right.
All right. Till next time. Cheers. Thanks for listening.